The Department for Transport want to introduce a minimum learning period of up to 6 months for learner drivers, and they're considering a minimum number of hours, essentially a minimum number of lessons and a compulsory syllabus. Now, this is great news for driving instructors. This will push up demand for driving lessons. That will increase the hourly rate of driving lessons and the average number of lessons someone has before they pass their driving test. Win for the instructor, but lose for the learner driver. The Department for Transport say this is for safety, but I've been teaching people for 17 years now, and I don't think it's going to significantly impact safety. We've had a driving test in Great Britain for 90 years now, and I think the reason why they're choosing to try to implement this minimum learning period now instead of the last 90 years is for another reason. And I think it's got something to do with how long it takes to get a driving test in Great Britain at the moment. In this video, I'm going to explain why I don't think these changes will have a significant impact on safety and what you can do to stop these changes from happening. Let's start with what we know to be true and tragic. 17 to 24-year-old drivers, they are the highest risk group of drivers. They account for just 6% of driving licenses, yet in 2024 they were involved in 24% of fatal and serious collisions. In 2024, 273 people died in collisions that in some way involved a 17 to 24-year-old driver. Now, I need to clarify this. This does not mean the 17 to 24-year-old driver was at fault. They may have been, they may not have been. This does not mean the 17 to 24-year-old driver was the person who was killed or injured. They may have been, somebody else may have been. It just means that 24% of fatal and serious collisions in some way involved a driver that was 17 to 24 years old. It could have been one car in that collision, it could have been multiple cars in that collision or multiple vehicles. Now, I don't think we should ignore this. I think the Department for Transport should look into lowering this. But having taught people to drive for 17 years, I don't think making people wait 6 months after passing their theory test to then be able to take their practical test, or making them do a minimum number of supervised hours, I don't think those measures are going to have a significant impact on road safety. The reason why I don't think these measures are going to have a significant impact on road safety is because in Great Britain we already have a driving test that requires a very high standard of driving to pass it. That means the driver needs enough skill and experience to be able to drive safe enough to pass that test. Many experienced drivers on a daily basis don't bother to drive safe enough to pass the practical test. Both experienced drivers and new drivers have enough skill and experience to drive safely. It's a matter of choice as to whether or not they do. Making all new drivers take longer before they can take their practical test, or making them take a minimum number of hours, is only going to cost them more money, and it's going to make their lives harder. If the Department for Transport want to decrease collisions in this age group, they need to focus on what actually causes the collisions. And that is very rarely a lack of skill or experience. So why is it then that younger people are involved in more collisions than older people if they already have enough skill and experience to be safe? You don't have to know much about humans to know that younger people are more likely to take risks than older people. Younger people are more likely to succumb to peer pressure than older people. Younger people are more likely to show off than older people are. It doesn't mean older people don't do these things, it's just that younger people are more likely, and we are dealing with a population of people here, not an individual. An individual might be 17 going on 70, or 70 going on 17, but on average, younger people are more likely to take part in risky activities and behave in a more risky manner. A person's brain is actually developing into their mid-20s. They even mentioned this in the consultation. And the part of the brain that's developing is crucial for decision making and risk assessment. Making someone take longer to learn to drive or take a minimum number of hours isn't going to change this. In fact, I've always found this a little bit strange because as I've got older, I take less risks. The older I get, the less risky I become. Yet I have less years to lose. It's confusing. When I was younger, I would take far greater risks. Yet I had many more years to lose. It's strange, but it's quite normal. Generally, that's how people are. Younger people are more likely to take risks. Older people are less likely to take risks. And this is the reason why younger people are involved in more collisions. Making them wait 6 months before they can take their practical test or making them do a minimum number of hours is not going to change how risky they behave. This minimum learning period is not going to affect the less talented drivers because they're already likely going to take that amount of time to be able to pass the driving test anyway. It's going to likely affect the more talented drivers. And in my opinion, I think that's unfair because we're not all good at everything. Some of us are good at some things but bad at others. And if somebody is talented towards driving, they can pick it up quickly. I'm teaching them. They don't have much experience behind the wheel, but it feels like they do. Maybe they've picked it up from the passenger seat. That's maybe how they've become so aware of what they're doing and can learn to drive and pass their driving test so quickly. They're talented. Should we be holding them back? They're good at something, or should we allow them to be good at it? Should we allow them to pass their driving test in less time because they need less time? Or should we force them to take just as long as someone who is less talented towards it, meaning they cannot use what they are good at to their advantage? That's why I think it's unfair. What do you think though? Should we just allow them to see if they can pass the driving test, if they can prove that they're good enough at driving, good enough? Or should we make them artificially take longer than they need to? In the USA, there was a study, I'll put it on screen, that looked at minimum learning periods that was introduced in some states for driving. They averaged it out, and for 16 to 17-year-olds, there was a 7% reduction in deaths. So therefore, you could say it works. The minimum learning period worked in the USA, or in some US states. Interestingly, when they looked at minimum number of learning hours, that didn't seem to affect the number of deaths. But just because it worked in the USA, that doesn't mean it's going to work in Great Britain, because as I've said, the driving standard needed to pass the driving test in Great Britain is already very high. Now, it's generally accepted that although US states have very different driving test standards, generally in the USA, the standard needed to pass the driving test is lower than it is in Great Britain. So it would make sense that if you made someone take longer to learn to drive in a place where the standard is lower, that may increase their skill and experience enough that they are safer. But in a country like Great Britain, where we already have a very high standard required to pass the test, it's unlikely going to make as much difference, or if any difference at all, because of how learning works. When people learn something, they learn very quickly to begin with, and then they sort of plateau and then make incremental improvements. Now, in my opinion, given the standard of driving needed to pass the driving test in Great Britain, people who pass the driving test in Great Britain are already in that slower stage where they're making incremental improvements. They've done the quick bit and now they're incrementally improving. Making them take longer is only going to improve their skill and experience incrementally. It's not going to make a big difference. So although it may have worked in the US, I don't think it's going to work in Great Britain because we already have a very high level of skill needed to pass the driving test. In my opinion, the reason why the Department for Transport are trying to implement this minimum learning period now, instead of the last 90 years that Great Britain has had a driving test, they're doing it now because at the moment the DVSA and the Department for Transport have a big problem. And that problem is they simply don't have enough driving tests to go round. They are trying to keep up with demand, but they are failing. In some places, it's getting worse. So now what I believe they are doing is they are resorting to trying to control the queue. They are trying to delay when people can take their practical test to make their statistics look better. The fact is, Many people who pass their theory test haven't just started to learn to drive. Many people are near the end of learning to drive and are ready to pass a practical test, and they want the opportunity to take a practical test shortly after passing the theory test. And if the Department for Transport delay when they can take a practical test, well, this is going to take the pressure off them. They're going to be controlling the queue. Their statistics are going to look better, but it's not going to be helping the people. It's actually going to be hurting some of the people. They are also suggesting introducing a mandatory syllabus for driving instructors. I can't comment on whether or not this will be good or bad because there are no details about the syllabus. It doesn't tell us what's in it, how in depth it is, and whether it would be enforced or not. But bear this in mind. If you tell someone this is the goal you need to achieve, and you give someone freedom to find ways to try and achieve that goal, you can be surprised at what they come up with. Engineers do this all the time. It amazes me what engineers can come up with. But if you tell someone you need to achieve this, and this is exactly how you're going to achieve it, you don't have creative freedom. You don't have thought of how you can help different individuals. You create a one-size-fits-no-one drone just going through procedure. When I say one size fit no one, okay, it might fit a few people, but generally speaking, when you're dealing with people, you need to be flexible. This is actually what I do when I help my learner drivers. I give them a few procedures, some basics of what they need to do, and then I try to encourage them to achieve the goal of trying to be safe and legal. And when they ask me, what should I do here? I might say to them, what do you think's safe? Is it safe to go? Is it safe to wait? Where is a safe place to wait if you need to wait? So they start thinking for themselves. They start being creative, taking responsibility and initiative. If the Department for Transport genuinely want to lower collisions and deaths in 17 to 24-year-olds, I think they need to focus on what actually leads to these collisions. I think that's peer pressure and showing off. Yes, older people are also subjected to peer pressure and also have a tendency to show off, but most of us would agree, I think, that younger people are more likely to react to peer pressure. They feel peer pressure more intensely and they are more likely going to want to show off. Not all, but just more likely. If they focused on that, I think they may actually have a positive impact in reducing the number of collisions in that age group. I'm not saying what should happen, I'm just saying where they should be focusing. I can make a suggestion. Maybe young drivers can't take people in their car under a certain age during certain times of certain days. Because I know when I was 17, 18, a new driver, the worst driving I did or the worst driving I was subjected to as a passenger was when I was with my friends. Weekend, evening, night, early hours of the morning, showing off and also succumbing to peer pressure. I think if the Department for Transport focus on that and try and be creative in that area, they would have far more success than trying to delay when people can take their driving test. Also, I think it's important that the Department for Transport don't just focus on 17 to 24-year-olds. Yes, they should focus on them because they are a higher risk group, but they shouldn't forget that 76% of fatal and serious collisions involve drivers that are not 17 to 24. They should be making decisions which affect the bigger picture, not just the 17 to 24s, but yes, the 17 to 24s are, in my opinion, higher priority because they are higher risk. So this is how you can have your say. Click the link in the description to the consultation. There is nothing in it for me for you clicking this link. I've given you my opinion in this video. And in fact, even though I don't agree with what they are suggesting, if they were to implement what they are suggesting, that would actually probably benefit me as a driving instructor. I'm just trying to look out for learner drivers here. The problem with consultations is that so often so few people take part in them, meaning the outspoken minority have say over the silent majority, and often the silent majority don't even realise they can have a say. They are too busy with their lives, working, education, whatever it may be. So share the link with people, share the consultation with people, get as many people as you can to take part. You can share the video if you like. If you agree with me, you can share the video. If you don't agree with me, maybe just share the link and not the video, because obviously someone might agree with me if they listen to me, if that makes sense. But share what you like. It's just important as many people take part in this consultation as possible, so that the Department for Transport actually get a more truer representation of what the public actually want, not just a tiny minority of the public. And I've just had a thought. Who are the minority of people who are likely going to take part in this consultation? Driving instructors. Not because driving instructors are the only people aware of this consultation, but they're more likely to be aware of it because they work in this industry. And you can probably guess whether or not driving instructors as a whole, as an average, are going to agree or disagree with minimum learning hours and minimum learning time. So I highly recommend as many members of the public take part in this consultation as possible. And I just want to have one final comment, because reading through the consultation and reading through the statistics of deaths on the roads in Great Britain and how it's been changing, there was something that was starting to stand out to me. And that is, I can't be sure, but it certainly seems to be the case, that if a driver is involved in a collision, they are more likely to kill somebody else than kill themselves. And I think that's just an important piece of information to consider if you are considering driving in an unsafe manner. Well, I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're looking for car insurance, check out the links to Collingwood and Confused in the description. If you are learning to drive and want to insure yourself on somebody else's car, then Collingwood are there for you, because you can do so without affecting the owner's policy, and that takes away a big stress from the owner of that car that you are using to practice learning to drive in. Via the link at the moment, there's up to 35% off and a £20 gift card. If you want to insure your own car, I recommend checking out the link to confused.com, because you fill out one quote form and get loads of quotes back from many insurers to compare who's cheapest. And you can change your car on that quote as many times as you like without having to do the whole quote again. So it's a quick and easy way to compare how much it costs to insure different cars. Using the links doesn't cost you anything, but it does support the channel. So thank you very much. Subscribe to get my future videos, and until the next one, cheerio.